We started our journey when it was all dark, but here we are. We see that the sun is rising over New York. This is such a special feeling because many years ago I actually lived in this city, and ever since I thought I would want to record and tell the story of the city, and probably now it can happen. Look at the iconic skyline of New York. I'm almost being blown away right now. I think I've got goosebumps just looking at this view. And of course, looking at this view after all these years, that's what makes it all the more special. And honestly, I'm so excited about going out and about in the city, trying to record and tell the story of the city. I'm so looking forward to this. And I think the fact that New York is one of the few cities in the US which has this multi-layered history to it, that's what makes me all the more excited, because of course I grew up in New Delhi, where you see so much of history going back hundreds of years. New York, while not as old, it still has that very interesting history. This almost feels surreal. We are coming out of the train and coming out here into the Penn Station. This is, of course, as you can see, the newly transformed Penn Station. How beautiful! Especially with that early morning sun, everything looks so much better. So, New York is all about streets and avenues, and they're all numbered streets and avenues, because almost like the graph that you would see in your mathematics class, New York is built as a grid. So in order to locate yourself, if you only know what's the street number and avenue number you're by, that's it. You would be able to tell anyone where you are. So we'll be now exiting at the intersection of the 8th Avenue and 33rd Street. And as you can see, it's a beautiful and quiet New York morning. You don't usually see New York this quiet, but of course mornings do that to any city. That's one more reason why I love mornings so much. And do you see that Olivia thing in the distance? Many years ago, that was actually the building in which I lived. Of course, I don't live there anymore, but I would still try to tell the story of the city through the eyes of somebody who lives here. And we'll see how it goes. That's the Olivia. So this part of New York is, of course, Manhattan. New York has 5 different boroughs. Manhattan is probably the most famous borough. And within Manhattan also, we are in this area that's called the Midtown Manhattan. The street that we are walking on is the 33rd Street, and of course you noticed the intersection that we started from was 33rd and 8th, so that avenue is the 8th Avenue. That's of course the Olivia, my old building. This is a very iconic Midtown view. That building that you see in the distance, that's one of the most famous buildings in the world, probably. It's the Empire State Building. And the circular thing that you see just right here, that's actually one of the most famous arenas in the world. This is the Madison Square Garden. I'm sure all of us have memories of the Madison Square Garden because when we were growing up and we watched something like WWE or WWF, this is where many of the biggest matches were held, the Madison Square Garden. And here we are about to walk away from the Madison Square Garden. And of course from the iconic Empire State Building. This street, of course you would know what this is because the other one that I was walking on earlier was the 33rd Street. So this one is the 8th Avenue. And in New York, the streets that are going north-south in this grid, they're called avenues, whereas the ones that go east-west are called streets. So now we are walking on 8th Avenue and walking north. It's quite something to imagine that I was living right here many years ago. And we're about to get another view of the Empire State Building, this time from the 34th Street, right there. This black building is another iconic one in this neighborhood. It's called the One Penn Plaza, and I read that it has 14 entrances and 44 elevators. That's crazy. The Manhattan Center is another very interesting building in Midtown. This was originally built as an opera house. It was called the Manhattan Opera House, but later on it was transformed into just a general purpose performance center sort of a place. And in Midtown, this is what you'll see. You'll see a lot of interesting buildings with interesting history, a lot of places where performances of various art forms happen all the time. Of course, Broadway and Times Square is not too far from here as well. And of course, this iconic hotel, it's at least iconic for me because it's the New Yorker, and it was kind of my neighborhood hotel because 34th Street was technically my back street or back lane. And wow, look at that view, the Empire State Building from the 34th Street. And as I look at this building, I think about New York and New Delhi, how they're somewhat similar, yet so very different. So New York is called New York because the Britishers gave it that name, and there's actually a place called York back in the UK. So they thought, why not call this New York? And The people from Netherlands thought the same, and they, before New York was there, called this place New Amsterdam because, of course, they had Amsterdam. There's a similar story with New Delhi, of course. New Delhi was named after the older cities of Delhi, so Delhi was not really a place in the UK, but Delhi was still right there, and the Britishers rechristened their little city within Delhi as New Delhi. So yeah, colonialism actually played a role in the names of both of these cities. I think I feel inspired already. It's only been like 30 minutes since I arrived, but there's something about this city that energizes you and makes you feel inspired in a way. But anyways, coming back to where we are walking, now we are going north of the 34th Street, and this small neighborhood within Midtown Manhattan, this is called the Garment District because this is where lots of garment workers used to live and where a lot of the base of the garment industry in the US was laid. Of course, I had to get a hotel, and of course, I had to be on the 29th floor. Wow. I just cannot express this feeling right now. Being in this city on a beautiful bright day, looking at the blue skies and the beautiful skyline of Midtown Manhattan, and just trying to relax in this hotel room. This is just beautiful. All these buildings are actually fairly new. When I was last in the city, that section, it's actually called Hudson Yards, was still under construction. I love especially those two buildings in the middle. So let's take you right there. Alright, so here we are just at the edge of Hudson Yards, and the first building that you see is 1 Manhattan West. The second building that you see is the shorter one, and it's called 2 Manhattan West. Oh my god, this is such a view. So the tower on the right has 67 stories and it's almost 1/3 of a kilometer tall, whereas the one on the left has 59 stories. And I remember a time when these buildings did not exist. I only saw this as a construction area, and the construction here too was on a massive scale because these buildings are actually built on top of train tracks. Because remember, the Penn Station is literally next door. So these massive buildings, even today, sit on top of those train tracks. I mean, just imagine the scale of that engineering challenge. Where's, for instance, the foundation of these buildings if there's a train track underneath? It's just mind-blowing. So this is 2 Manhattan West, as I mentioned, and they're both equally beautiful. And while it's easy to casually talk about these buildings and say things like beautiful, I think it's extremely difficult to quantify what amazing engineering marvels they are. Back at the hotel room now, but we are still adoring 1 Manhattan West and 2 Manhattan West. As I was mentioning earlier, it's very difficult to appreciate the huge amount of effort and planning and engineering excellence that's required to build each and every one of these buildings. I mean, I know when you're trying to build a house, that is difficult, and this is just a completely different scale. Looking down these 29 floors and thinking about all the designing and planning and plumbing and electrical and all the coordination that goes into building something that's so massive. I'm still thinking about what it takes to build these modern skyscrapers, and it just completely blows my mind. In fact, I was reading about 1 Manhattan West and 2 Manhattan West. They're actually built on top of what used to be train tracks. And they had to first cover those train tracks with a platform and then build these massive skyscrapers. It took almost, I think, 5-6 years to build them. Time to go down the 29 floors, but when in New York, I'm sure we'll keep talking about the huge buildings and skyscrapers that we see everywhere around here. There you go. We are back on the streets, now walking on the 34th Street. And interestingly, the 34th Street kind of divides two different neighborhoods of Manhattan. On my left, which means increasing street numbers, is what's called the garment district, where, as I mentioned, a lot of the garment work used to happen, and it was the epicenter of that industry, not only in New York, but in the US. And on my right is Chelsea. And that's, of course, Empire State, which, believe it or not, was built in 1 year and maybe like 1 month. So coming back to the Empire State Building, it's almost unbelievable that it was built in just about 1 year. Whereas when we look at the modern buildings, such as even the 1 Manhattan West and 2 Manhattan West that I was talking about, they took multiple years to finish. So that kind of makes the Empire State Building all the more special. This building, by the way, is 1 Penn Plaza. We saw it earlier. The original engineering marvel. The Empire State Building, built almost 100 years ago. We are still amongst these beautiful buildings of Midtown Manhattan. This is still, of course, the 34th Street. And what I'm trying to do is to try and find a place where I can eat. This is the iconic New York subway, and that green and white light that you see, this is sort of something that you can see from a distance, and you can understand that there's a station right there. "34th and 7th, that's our exact location right now. It's breakfast time and I'm really hungry. This one is a spot I've known for years. So the hotel, of course, does not offer free breakfast, and that's the reason I'm here. But I think I'm liking the fact that I'm here. if my memory serves me right, this place is open 24/7 and it's actually quite reasonably priced as well, and I like their food. Of course, not much of that because I'm mostly a vegetarian except for the eggs that I eat. But yeah, this one's a nice place and it's located right on the 7th Avenue, close to the 34th Street. There we go. I'm really hungry, and that's my delicious looking omelette and potatoes, and there's some bread toast to go with it as well, and of course some coffee that I'll have later. I really enjoyed my breakfast. Maybe it was my hunger combined with my nostalgia of the place from many years ago. It made it all the more better. That building, by the way, is the one that we were looking at earlier, 1 Manhattan West. But yeah, I do have the energy now to walk around and explore this exciting city all the more. We are at 33rd and 8th. So yeah, 33rd and 8th, that's how easy it is to find out your location or share your location in the city. Just mention the street and the avenue. And of course, if you can see the Empire State Building, you must stop and adore the view. Here's some deja vu for me. Many years ago, when I was just about to leave the city, this exact spot was where I was sitting. In fact, that fire hydrant was what I was sitting on, and I was just adoring the same view. But I'm glad to be back.